An opportunity has arisen to be mistress of the King of England. You could secure for this family incalculable wealth and position.
Do I have a choice?
No.
Hello, and welcome to Media-eval, a medieval pop culture podcast, where we talk about how medieval and medieval-inspired movies, TV, and books depict the medieval world. What do they get right? What do they get wrong? And what do they tell us about how modern people see the medieval past? I'm Sarah ifft, a medieval historian, and today I'll be venturing into the early modern era in a discussion of the 2008 film The Other Boleyn Girl with guest Dana Carriere. Hi, Dana.
Hello.
Would you like to tell the listeners a little bit about yourself and why you were interested in / willing to talk about this movie?
I don't know if it was willing or if I just said, hey, I'll do this, but we have to go to the early modern period. I hate Philip Gregory, and I'm going to talk about it if you want to or not. I've always loved history. It's a long-standing obsession of mine. I think I want to say I was about 10 or 11 when I discovered the Tudors and that period in history, and it started off a decades-long love affair with not only Anne Boleyn, but England and history even more than it already was. So, yeah, that's why I'm here. I hate Philippa Gregory. She is the mirror image of me in that she's the evil twin. We have a lot of the same interests, and I should theoretically love her, but her favorites are so not mine, and she's so mean to the people that I think of as my favorites. It's just bad.
Yeah, I have a similar issue with her. So The Other Boleyn Girl, by the way, is a film that's based on Philippa Gregory's 2001 novel. It's one of the first things I read when I was first getting into medieval and early modern history. I had a family trip planned to England and basically decided I wanted to do some historical reading and kind of started in the Middle Ages and ventured occasionally into the early modern period and never entirely left. And this is one of the things that I did read pretty early and already was very annoyed because I love Anne Boleyn and Philippa Gregory does not love Anne Boleyn, and she makes some choices that I feel very resentful and angry about.
Oh, yeah.
So we feel similarly, I think.
I also just want to say that I'm glad I'm not the only one who, whenever I'm going to a location, decides to do some reading about where I'm going. It's kind of ridiculous. My friends always mock me because I've been to England now 5 times. Every time I go, I take a couple different historical and classic English fiction books. They're like, you're going to be there. Why are you reading about it? I'm like, so I can read about it and then look up and there it is. I mean, obviously.
It really does, I think, make travel more, I don't know, it enriches it for me when you get to actually know something about the places that you're seeing. I've always really enjoyed doing that. Mm-hmm. The Other Boleyn Girl stars Natalie Portman as Anne Boleyn and Scarlett Johansson as her sister Mary Boleyn. It utterly inexplicably stars Eric Bana as Henry VIII. If you are listening to this and do not know what Henry VIII looks like, please go and look up a portrait of Henry VIII and also look at a picture of Eric Bana. It's a weird decision.
It's so stupid. This is back in the early whenevers when they were trying to make Eric Bana a thing. And
right.
I just want to mean girls, stop trying to make Eric Bana a thing. He's never going to happen. And he's just so badly miscast in this.
Yeah. I mean, he's very pretty, but it's just not, this was not the role for him.
No.
It also stars Kristen Scott Thomas as Elizabeth Boleyn, Anne and Mary's mother. She is fabulous.
Yeah, spoiler alert for the rest of the podcast here, guys. We love her, and anytime she is on screen, we will talk about how awesome she is.
Yeah, I'm going to gush about her because just every line she delivers to perfection, you can tell that she is the, I think, most talented cast member by far.
Easily.
Yeah. Then it's also fun because this movie has a number of people who in 2008 were not especially famous, but are now famous. And I found them very distracting in their minor roles in this film. The first of these is the man that I looked at and said, Benedict Cumberbatch is in this movie? Yes, he is. Benedict Cumberbatch plays William Carey, Mary Boleyn's first husband.
It's basically Benedict Cumberbatch as Benedict Cumberbatch, because aside from a couple of things, he just always kind of is the same to me. everyone says he's such a good actor, and I'm like, is he? Or is he just so Benedict Cumberbatchy that we just let him get away with it?
Right. Yeah, it's like, yeah, he might also always do the same thing. That's fine, whatever. It also has, as William Stafford, who, spoiler, will end up being Mary's second husband, the person that I looked at and said, and at first just said, who is that Eddie Redmayne looking motherfucker? And then at some point in like a subsequent scene, I'm like, wait, is that actually Eddie Redmayne? And it is.
Surprise!
Yeah, so Eddie Redmayne is in this movie at a time when I don't think anyone had ever heard of Eddie Redmayne. So that's fun.
Now that I've been saying his name a lot, Eddie Redmayne, that's actually a really fun name to say as well.
It kind of is.
Like Benedict Cumberbatch.
Yeah.
So he's just going to be Eddie Redmayne for the rest of the show.
Right. Not quite as fun to say, but still weird to see, is Alfie Allen. In other words, Theon Greyjoy. And I did, when watching this movie entirely by myself in a house alone with no one there except for a dog and cat, did audibly say, is that Theon fucking Greyjoy? In his, like, one scene in this movie.
Oh, no. He's got at least, well, maybe it's two. It's two scenes.
Right, yeah. It's not literally just one scene, but it's not a lot.
No, it's not. And you can't look at him and think anything but Theon fucking Greyjoy.
Nope, it's just impossible now. That is the cast of this film. I am certainly never going to refer to Benedict Cumberbatch as anything but Benedict Cumberbatch.
Nope, he's Benedict Cumberbatch.
Yep. I'm going to start with the enumeratio section where we talk about basically what happened in this film. And I'll begin with just a brief orienting recap, or at least I tried to have it be brief. It's not as brief as they often are, because there is a decent amount of plot. In fact, perhaps so much plot that they do like 3 years and 20 minutes.
Yes, try not to be like this movie. Try not to skip over everything in 30 seconds.
So many choices were made. The influential Thomas Howard, Duke of Norfolk, knowing that Henry is displeased with the inability of his wife, Catherine of Aragon, to bear children, seeks a family member to become Henry's mistress. His niece Anne Boleyn is tasked with this responsibility, but Henry prefers Anne's sister Mary, who is recently married. Mary and Henry have a very public affair, but when Mary becomes pregnant, Anne is then brought back to keep the king from turning to a woman outside the Howard clan. She does almost too good of a job, now winning over Henry to such an extent that he not only abandons Mary and their newborn child, but ultimately breaks with the church to divorce his wife Catherine. After Henry marries Anne and she is crowned queen, their relationship speeds rapidly, keyword here is rapidly, downhill, through the machinations of her own terrible uncle and sister-in-law. Anne is accused of incest and adultery. Mary pleads for her life but is unsuccessful, and Henry has both Anne and her brother George executed. Mary takes off and lives in the country with a new husband, her own children, and Anne's daughter, the future Queen Elizabeth. So that was a lot.
It vaguely resembles something that actually happened in history.
Yes. In that very vague outline, I would say many parts of what I just said are historical reality. Not all of it, but many parts. As we go into the more detailed recap, we will see that increasingly less, basically the more detail we get into, the more of it's wrong.
Someone skimmed Wikipedia.
Exactly. That's exactly what this movie feels like. It feels like one of those movies where somebody skimmed a Wikipedia article. It's almost like a telephone game, actually, where somebody skimmed Wikipedia and then, based on their memory of skimming the Wikipedia article, told somebody else what happened, and then that person made this movie.
It's true, and I'm not going to do this a lot, but I will give it to Philippa Gregory here in that I don't think this is entirely her fault. I think that it's the fault of the people who had to adapt her book into an actual movie. They basically read the Goodreads blurb of her book.
Right.
They read Wikipedia and they said, okay, we got this. That is the only time I will give Philippa Gregory anything in regards to a compliment, but there you go.
Yeah, I will say as well, I think she actually did research. I don't agree with all of the choices that she ultimately made, but she clearly did research, which is far more than I can say for the people responsible ultimately for making the movie.
Very true.
The film opens with this view of Anne, Mary, and their brother George as children. And what we learn from this scene is apparently that your personality is completely set in stone by the time you're like 9 years old and you never change.
I just like that he just apparently sat down his family for the good old Myers-Briggs test. and
Right.
is demanded that they all run around in a field while he talks to his wife about it.
And he's like, all right, Anne's the ambitious one, Mary's the nice one, whatever. That's it. That's what you're like. It's all settled forever.
Oh my gosh, no, he just took the Pottermore quiz and sorted all his children into their Hogwarts house. He's very excited to talk about it.
Anne is Slytherin.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Mary is Hufflepuff.
Mary's definitely Hufflepuff. I'm going to say George is Hufflepuff, too.
Yeah.
I think that is maybe why he seems a little bit disappointed with George, because he was hoping for Gryffindor, but you got a Slytherin, man. You got Anne. You got all you need.
I mean, he also... Most of the characters in this movie seem to forget that George exists 80% of the time is the other problem.
They're like, oh yeah, George, remember him?
Yeah, which is a choice. And which also is something that it's been a long time at this point since I've actually read the book, The Other Boleyn Girl, but I don't think that was as egregious of an issue in the book.
I don't forget him. So it doesn't really matter what the movie does, because I never forget that he's really close by and adorable.
We now skip forward a decade or so in time to Mary's wedding to Benedict Cumberbatch.
Oh, yeah. Who doesn't want to marry Benedict Cumberbatch? A lot of people, I would assume, but...
Yeah, I don't especially want to marry Benedict Cumberbatch personally, although if you do, that's good for you.
I'm not exactly proud of that, but I wouldn't mind.
Yeah, he's a little too, lizard looking.
He is very lizard looking. I don't know what it is about him that I find attractive, but I did in fact spend my 30th birthday flying to England to see him in Hamlet. I paid a truly frightening amount of money for tickets to be in the 6th row, and I hunted the stage door for a couple of days. I have no regrets.
Did you meet him?
I did, yes. It was horrible and awkward, but I survived and it was really fun.
Okay. All right, well, that's good. And was he nice?
He was very nice, and it was like the third night had been there. He had to leave early the past couple of nights, so he hadn't been able to do it. So me and a bunch of other girls just kept coming back. And it was girls. I was the oldest there by at least a decade. And yeah, he signed my program, and I got to have Ciaran Hinds sign something for me, who is
nice.
the poor man's Alan Rickman. And it was very exciting.
Yeah. Nice. Meanwhile, Catherine of Aragon, queen to Henry VIII, gives birth to a stillborn child. Everyone is very unhappy. And the Duke of Norfolk decides to ride off to the Boleyn household to basically just provide exposition and explain to the audience what is going on in the plot.
Yes, this is Uncle Exposition. Get used to him. He will show up to be Uncle Exposition quite a bit. Mm-hmm. This is your favorite character, right? This is the guy that you really, really love.
Oh, I have a special place of deep hatred in my heart for the Duke of Norfolk, in large part because of things that don't actually appear in this movie. The short version that I will just give now is that the Duke of Norfolk, may he rot in hell, after, everybody knows, obviously, Anne Boleyn dies at the end. So after he married his niece to the king and the king killed her, he decides, 10 fucking years later, oh, you know what's a really good idea? I should, have another one of my nieces try to attract the eye of a king. And guess what? She's the other one who got beheaded. Good job, Norfolk. Good fucking job. Showing some real family feeling there.
0 for 2. Way to go.
Yep. So he just makes me so angry. And I think he is just an actually terrible human being.
Oh, he's awful. He's just awful. I do not hate him as much just because Uncle Exposition is played by David Morrissey, who I have a weird fondness for after seeing him in a British TV show it was over probably about a decade now, Viva Blackpool. It's not a good show, but it's really entertaining.
All right, fair enough.
So anytime he was on screen, I just kind of started singing at him, and yeah.
Right.
So, and again, weird fondness, but he's awful.
Yeah, he's certainly awful in this. He suggests that given the situation with Catherine, they should find a nice Howard girl to become the king's mistress. The problem with this, of course, by the way, is that everyone is named Thomas. There is Thomas Boleyn and Thomas Howard are the two men in this particular scene. There's actually even an additional 4 men named Thomas who should have been in this movie and aren't, so it's an issue. But anyway, Thomas Boleyn suggests his daughter, Anne, as a good candidate because basically, she's an ambitious bitch is pretty much the implication.
Yes, that's exactly what her Hogwarts test said as well.
Yes. Mary, meanwhile, is dropped off by Anne for her awkward sex night with Benedict Cumberbatch, and it is awkward.
It's so awkward.
Well, Anne goes and finds out about this whole she's going to flirt with the king plan and is very pleased.
There's a nice moment of sister solidarity here where Anne sort of walks with her and offers her support. Yeah. And I'd like to imagine that that's a real thing. Maybe not necessarily between these two, because I don't think these two were actually particularly close. But I'd like to imagine that back in those days that are slightly worse than the way we have it now, when you were escorted to your bedchamber, that there was someone there saying it's okay.
Right, yeah. It is a nice moment, and it is also kind of fun the next day where they chat about just how terrible sex with Benedict Cumberbatch is. I appreciated that.
I'd imagine that is not the first time that that has happened either.
That does seem like something that really rings true to me, that especially because I would bet that for many young women getting married, the first time you have sex, like, probably honestly is not great. You're, marrying somebody that you probably don't have much of a relationship with, and honestly, like, sex your very first time is usually not the best anyway.
No.
And so given that, I bet there were a lot of conversations essentially about how much sex sucked on your wedding night.
And I think having it be with Benedict Cumberbatch would be especially awkward. He just seems like he's very awkward in bed.
Yes, and he is in the scene as he, like, climbs on top of her. He is extremely awkward. So good job, Benedict Cumberbatch.
Oh, thank you for that visual. That was what I tried to forget.
The king then arrives to extremely ominous music, and we switch back and forth as we have this ominous music between these dramatic scenes of Henry riding a horse, and then these dramatic scenes of people, like, chopping carrots in the kitchen. Because everything is very dramatic and ominous.
Two things of equal weight, I think.
Right.
Riding a horse dramatically and chopping a carrot. This scene bothered me deeply. The whole movie bothered me, but this scene, I've been reading a lot about how to use film language to get a point across without actually saying it. And having this sort of dramatic music highlighting it's the king made me laugh and was really frustrating, because I don't think you can watch this movie and not know who Henry VIII is. Even if you barely paid attention to history in high school when they talked about it for 5 seconds or whatever, most people have generally heard of Henry VIII and know at least the bare bones of the story. There's a whole rhyme about it, guys. Google it if you're unsure. I can't imagine that the movie felt the need to just really throw at you, hey, this guy's important. Well, no shit, Sherlock. Huh.
Right. It's like you could be moderately subtle here with your strategies, at least.
It was just the impression of cutting with the food, with the scene. If it had been like a bunch of people standing around looking tense, it would have been annoying but bearable. It was just the cooking. I don't understand why you felt the need to really dramatically cook.
Right. No, it's so bizarre. The king finally arrives. We also meet Stafford, a.k.a. Eddie Redmayne, for the first time. And Anne starts flirting with the king, which at first seems to be going well. But then they go hunting, and Anne rides down this ravine, and then because of toxic masculinity, Henry has to follow her to prove that a girl can't do something that he can't do. And then he sucks, so he falls. And hurts himself. And then he hates Anne now because of his own fucking toxic masculinity, which is just so typical.
Of course. Please insert the Sarah McLachlan song of your choice here, as toxic masculinity does claim another victim.
Then they send Mary to go and tend him on his sickbed. And I guess basically the implication here is that he's had too much of women with personality. And needs to go as bland as possible. It's like you've had really spicy food, and then just after that, you're like, no, I can't handle this. I need to have like plain white rice. That's basically the implication, is that then he's like, Mary, you're so boring. I love it. And is into her.
Which is funny, but there's also the less funny implication that men think they want someone exciting, and what they actually really want is a doormat, which, is unpleasant and true.
Yeah, quite true. Big problem. He decides that he's into Mary. He invites her to court, and Benedict Cumberbatch is fairly chill about the fact that we're all gonna pimp out his wife now.
Yeah, I guess that's just a thing you probably had to deal with, but yeah, doesn't seem like something I'd be down with. I don't really know what you can do, though. I've been thinking about this. What other choice did he have?
Right, exactly. That to some extent, there's really nothing else that he can do. But he actually seems less upset, though, than Anne, who is really jealous that Mary is getting to sleep with the king instead of her. They arrive at court, and Catherine, who clearly knows what's up, tries to embarrass Mary by making her sing in public, which Anne clearly thinks is absolutely fucking hysterical.
This is the part where I remembered, oh yeah, Scarlett Johansson tried to have a music career at some point.
And she's not a bad singer, and because in some ways it's a little weird, because I think the scene actually might have made more sense if she was a worse singer.
Oh yeah, if she had just been horrible, it would have really worked a lot better. Her being just kind of okay, the scene falls flat, so to speak.
Yeah, and she's very awkward about it. I mean, there's nothing wrong with the acting. It's clear that she acts as she is not comfortable singing in public. But yeah, it would have been a much better scene if she had like sung actively badly, and instead it's just like, all right, she's fine, whatever. That didn't really seem like it was quite as embarrassing as it was supposed to be, but sure.
Well, because Catherine's follow-up is, you sound like a songbird or something like that.
Right.
I'm like, okay, is she, I honestly couldn't figure out, is she trying to make fun of her, or is she trying to be nice and pump her up and say, oh, that was great? I don't get it. I mean, I know what they think they were going for, but it's not really clear.
Right, because it read to me as if it was supposed to be sarcastic.
Exactly.
But that didn't work because her voice was fine.
Yeah, definitely.
And then in her first illustration of how she's terrible, Jane Parker, one of the other ladies in waiting, goes out to basically explain to Anne and Mary what the dynamic was in that room, which is something that obviously they knew because they're not idiots.
Well, Mary, but still, I think even Mary has enough intelligence, or at least Anne will tell her later, about what the underpinnings of what was actually happening there. All I could think of was, did they just do this for the audience? Did they really feel that they had to spell out what just happened, that we couldn't figure out what was really going on?
Right.
And I'm like, way to make your audience hate this one character early. I mean, way to get that set up right away.
But, you know, they're not wrong. Jane Parker is and will continue to be terrible, so. Jane is then, meanwhile, seems to be interested in George. That is a hint to how she will continue to be important subsequently. George is not happy.
Yeah, George looks really upset by this.
Yeah. I think he describes her as repulsive or something along those lines. Which is clearly based on her personality, primarily.
Oh,
by
yeah.
the way. Like, she's, I mean, she's not, like, stunningly gorgeous, but she's, like, adequate looking. And it's very much implied that, like, the repulsiveness is just, like, the way that she chooses to be.
her entire internal monologue is just really bad.
Right. Anne is flirting with Henry Percy. We'll continue with that later. And Henry, the king, ever the romantic, just whispers the one word "tonight" to Mary to let her know that she has to come fuck him.
And everyone looks really surprised, even though this is exactly why she was brought to court. Of course she was there to have sex with him. What else was she doing?
Right.
And the scene, if there had been, like, even the tiniest bit of chemistry between Eric Bana and Scarlett Johansson, this could have been kind of sexy in that if there had been, like, a build-up and you had really felt these two characters had a connection, and he whispered just to her "tonight," and instead it's just kind of like, ew.
Yeah, and especially because they cast Mary as so placid and boring that essentially, like, then they spend a ton of the movie then essentially with her telling us that she's in love with and has this chemistry with Henry that we're not seeing on screen, because she's being played as the most boring person alive and as having next to no visible emotions.
And I feel, okay, so say what you will about Scarlett Johansson, she's kind of controversial in terms of her, if she's actually really good or not. I think she's good, and I don't think she plays Mary bad. I think Mary is just a character with so little to go on that it's just bad. And I don't know, I haven't read the novel. Is she the point of view character in the novel?
I think so. And I think that helps with giving more a sense of her interiority. And I think also I will say I agree that I actually think Scarlett Johansson is talented. I don't think this is her fault. I think it's the fault of the direction that she's being told to act this way.
Yeah, it's the direction and it's the writing of her character, and that there's nothing there.
Yeah, it's some bad choices. Mary then has sex with Henry, and I guess he's sexier and a much better kisser than Benedict Cumberbatch, so that's fun for everybody. They have this weird bonding conversation where they're both like, it's so hard to be the second child. And it's like, okay, Henry, your older brother actually seems, as far as I can tell, to have also been like very boring and like very much not a like forceful personality, and he like died relatively young and then you became king. Like, I feel like you weren't that overshadowed. No. And then it's also bizarre because, and we'll get to this later, they actually switched the ages of Anne and Mary. Anne is probably the younger sibling. And so it's this bizarre, like, did they do that just so they can have this scene where they talk about how hard it is to be the second child?
And if they did, is that really all they could think of for these two people to talk about and have in common and bond over?
It's just so weird. And it's also not something that I feel, I don't know. I mean, I'm sure people have talked about things like, you know, sibling dynamics and how they're hard maybe, but I feel like if people actually have chemistry and get along, you should be able to like find things to talk about where you know, find similarities and connections with one another that aren't like based purely on birth order. Like, I'm pretty sure that plenty of people meet and have sex and fall in love without both happening to have the same birth order place.
I would assume so, but you can't ever be too sure. It's so frustrating watching them try to make this incredibly banal conversation sexy.
Yeah, and it's also like, oh, we're gonna like have sex and like this is supposed to be this like sexy scene, so like let's talk about our siblings? Okay. Sure, if that's what gets you going, I guess. Okay. After that, we're going to talk about parents. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah, and how, imagine the worst possible sex talk you can imagine with your parents. This is worse. The conversation in which Mary is brought straight from the fucking bedchamber to describe her sexual encounter in detail to her father and her uncle. So cool.
Yeah, that's great. I know that after I have sex, I like to have kind of a post-romp roundup with my family to discuss how it went and kind of strategize from there.
Yep. The best part about this scene, however, is that the uncomfortableness is somewhat mitigated by the fact that there are two very cool Irish wolfhounds.
The important part of the scene.
Yes, but still, it is extremely uncomfortable.
Oh, it's cringeworthy, and it's just not pleasant, and I can't imagine. It's not supposed to be a pleasant scene, I get that, but I don't know why they didn't have a scene of, like, Anne coming to Mary to ask about it, and then maybe Anne passing that on.
For that.
Or, like, Mary's mom, who's cool. We would absolutely love to see more Kristen Scott Thomas. Yes. Why don't have her show up and her talk about it, and then, you know, she relays back or something. Make it seem like this is an actual concerned family and not just, hey, how'd you bang? How'd it go? It's so bad.
Anne, meanwhile, in secret, marries Henry Percy. And they also seem to consummate the marriage. She, all excited, goes to tell Mary about this. Mary's like, yeah, there's no fucking way this is happening. And goes immediately to tattle on Anne to their parents and uncle.
It's so... I was really frustrated for many reasons. One, because Mary's little... snitches get stitches, Mary, really.
Yep.
Also... I can't imagine Anne doing something like this, because all we've seen from her so far, it gets better after she comes back from France, but she's still set up to be very smart, and I can't imagine her thinking that running off and marrying this guy is going to be great and everyone's going to be really happy for her.
Right. It's seems, as far as I can tell in real life, like she was a little less hasty about the whole thing, and it obviously didn't work out, but that my guess is that in reality, I don't think it went quite this far to the point of being something that could ruin her socially. I mean, if she's essentially portrayed as having, then basically just had sex with him out of wedlock, because the marriage would not be recognized. So, yeah, I just don't think she was quite that dumb to have taken this big of a risk.
It's just stupid. And the one thing I really don't think you could get away with Anne Boleyn is making her stupid.
Exactly. And so that's very frustrating. And they're trying to present her basically as just like headstrong, but yeah, it just doesn't entirely work.
No, at all.
She gets banished to France. God forbid I have to go to the court at Paris. The worst thing I could possibly imagine.
I used to have nightmares about being banished to France.
I would love right now to get banished to Paris.
Yeah, well,
that's amazing.
I don't know if right now would be the time to do that, but in general, send me to Paris if you must. I will cry and be so sad, let me tell you.
I know, yeah. Elizabeth, however, their mother, encourages Anne to take advantage of the opportunity and to learn from the French woman the art of being a woman, by which she means manipulating men into letting them think that they're in charge.
A very important skill to have.
We then have the classic scene wherein a woman vomits in a movie, so we know she's pregnant.
Surprise!
This happens in pre-modern as well as modern films. Mary and Henry are delighted, of course. Henry gives Mary and her family fancy new rooms, and Thomas Boleyn then also announces that George is going to marry Jane Parker, the Terrible. George is so not happy.
George is upset, and I want to call your attention to something here, people. Have you noticed how we didn't mention that Mary has a husband? That's because he's gone.
Yep.
Forget about him, because he will not be seen the rest of the movie.
I think the last time we see him is in the scene where Henry goes up and whispers tonight that we see Benedict Cumberbatch standing there looking vaguely ill.
I think so. I can't remember him after that point, so I'm pretty sure he just disappears.
Yeah, he never shows up again. And then at some point, this will show up in the future, she gets another marriage proposal. And at that point, it's like, wait, I'm sorry, is your husband, what happened to your husband?
The movie basically starts with your wedding. I'm pretty sure you were married. What happened? And it's one of the things I also really hated about this movie, because then I had to think about, okay, well, isn't it possible that this is her husband's child? I mean, she was sent to court right away, but did she stop having sex with her husband completely?
Right.
I don't know why everyone's getting so excited about a baby that's gonna be illegitimate at best and might not even be his.
Right. And then Elizabeth their mother is also less than pleased and basically says that why should she be happy like her husband thinks that they should be, given that she has one child forced to marry a girl he hates, one banished to France, and one whoring in public.
Whoring in public is my new favorite crime I didn't know that you could be convicted of. It's like one of those stupid laws that are still on the books somewhere, I'm sure.
Right.
But that's my new band name, Whoring in Public. There we go.
There you go. Mary wakes up and sees blood. The doctors confirm that the child is healthy, but that it's time for her to begin the part of your pregnancy where you lie alone in a room in the dark for the next 2 months, I guess.
Okay, so this has always been an uncomfortable idea, and it's certainly a scene when you see it on film. It's very scary. It is now so frightening to think of.
Yeah. It's like some Handmaid's Tale shit.
It's Handmaid's Tale shit, and it's also when you're trying to self-quarantine for whatever reason, whatever might be going on in the world, and you're just laying there and it's dark and you're all alone. It's terrible.
Right. Oof.
Yeah, I originally was going to pitch this to Blumhouse in terms of a new horror movie. However, I'm thinking I'm going to have to get in line. I think a couple months from now we're going to have a lot of movies like that.
Yeah, ugh. It's creepy. Norfolk is concerned that Henry might go after some Spanish girl, I guess, or quote, that milk-faced girl from the Seymour family, more on her later, and that they basically need to find somebody to make sure that he doesn't stray too far from Mary and stays within the Howard clan. And Tom suggests that Anne has been much changed by her time in France, which has been, I guess, like 3 months, so I guess she's a completely different person now.
It's like, what, maybe 5 minutes in movie time, so...
Right.
That's obviously enough to completely change your personality.
Right. I mean, I guess Mary's pregnancy has progressed enough that it certainly could be like, maybe, like, I feel like it can't be more than about 5 months.
At the most, yes.
Yeah. And suggests that she be brought back to entertain the king and keep his mind on Mary. She gets brought back and literally just, like, dropped on a shore alone with no luggage.
Which I guess is just 16th century Uber, where you're just,
Right.
There's a boat, and it's just you, and I guess whatever you're wearing, and hey, don't worry, we've got some horses you can dramatically ride along the beach.
She, then dramatically rides the horse across the beach, okay?
I don't know what it is about movies like this, but if no one rides dramatically on a horse to sweeping music, does the movie even get made? I mean...
Right? Like, what even is the point? And Anne then goes to court. I have such a crush on Anne in this scene at court. She's wearing this, like, amazing green dress and is just, like, so, like, beautifully snarky, and just, like, the way she commands a room, it is so sexy.
It's very hot.
Yeah. She flirts with Henry largely by kind of making the pretty clever move of insulting his big rival, Francois I of France.
But she does it in a very wonderfully subtle way, in that she doesn't just start walking up to him and talking how horrible his rival is, when I think even Henry would be onto that. She's very coy and very subtle in it, and it's wonderful.
She's very clever, and as I said, just like the way that she manages to have just all eyes on her and to really command the space. Like, I want to say the alternative history where Anne Boleyn's like a stand-up comedian.
Oh, that would be such a good one. I always thought growing up she'd make an excellent CEO.
True.
And I stand by that. I think that Anne Boleyn in the modern age you would definitely know her name. I think she'd be doing something.
Absolutely. Mary is upset because the king is flirting with Anne now. And George's terrible wife, Jane, is jealous that he's hanging out with his sisters instead of fucking her. Thanks, Jane. That's great. Good contribution here.
Way to help the team.
Yep. Henry sends Anne some fancy jewelry delivered by Theon fucking Greyjoy. And she sends it back. Anne and Mary have a lot of passive-aggressive conversations. Mary at this point tells Anne that she loves Henry, to which Anne responds, well, perhaps you should stop. To which it's like, you're not wrong. Not wrong here.
And that's when Anne said the smartest thing I've ever heard in a movie.
Right. Ugh. Henry goes to see Anne and asks Elizabeth as he's coming into their apartments, where is your daughter? The tone in which Kristen Scott Thomas delivers the line, which one, is absolute perfection.
So good. I want to think that this movie at some point had Oscar buzz when they were first talking about making it, and that's why they cast who they cast in it. And I have such a memory of Kristen Scott Thomas winning for The English Patient, but apparently it's the Mandela effect. She didn't. And I think if there had been anyone getting an Oscar for this movie, it would have been her. And the Oscars always have that one scene that they pick to show the clip of, and everyone claps afterwards. This would have been her scene. It would have just been her sitting there, looking up, going, which one? And she would have won, because it's so good.
It is. And I'm a big believer that there should be more recognition for actors who, like, really do their level best and really pull off a great performance in a movie that is not good.
Yes, and that does happen usually with, I want to say, like, Best Actor, Best Actress. I mean, you saw it even this last year with Renee Zellweger and Judy Garland. Everyone says she did great. The movie itself was meh.
So as I said, like, you know what? I think Kristen Scott Thomas deserved an Oscar nomination for this movie. The movie did not deserve anything else, but Kristen Scott Thomas deserved an Oscar nomination.
She had so little to work with, and she did it so well.
Yes. Mary gives birth. Childbirth is terrible, I'm sure always, but especially in the 16th century.
Oh.
And this is such an uncomfortable scene because it's Henry and Anne flirting to the background noise of Mary screaming in pain.
It sounds, it is about as romantic as it sounds. The way they make eyes at each other and talk flirtatiously, and in the background you could hear this just screams of agony, and it's just so bad. It's so bad.
Yeah.
You don't like Henry anyway, because Henry is Henry, but it just really makes you feel upset with Anne, because you're supposed to be better than this, honey.
Yeah, it's like, really, you're not a little, like, turned off by the fact that your sister is screaming in the background, and like, childbirth's rough. Like, she could die.
Maybe don't flirt over the corpse of your sister. Just a thought.
Yeah, it's not great. So Anne tells Henry that she's not sure if she can really love him because of his history with Catherine and with her sister makes her not super trustful. But then, as it is announced that Mary has given birth to a boy, she decides to, basically figure out, like, okay, I'm going to go all in for this and see what I can do, and tells Henry, yes, you can have hope if you never speak to your own wife or to my sister again. And he, in response, says, okay, cool, and walks the fuck out without speaking to the woman who just gave birth to his infant child or meeting his son. Dad of the fucking year here, everybody.
Henry's terrible. He's not going to get the mug that says world's best dad. He's going to get a thimble, and it will only get smaller and become non-existent as time goes on, because he is just really damn awful.
Yep, not a great dad. Anne is very smug. Norfolk is displeased because he now has reason to think that Mary can no longer bear children, and so the son could have in fact had some possibility of inheriting. To which Anne basically responds, he's a bastard, fuck off, and that in accordance with the king's wishes and hers, they will be sent to the country. And Elizabeth, who's clearly just like fucking sick of this, is like, all right, you can tell her that shit yourself.
I'm done, I'm out.
Right.
And we didn't really talk about it, but earlier, the reason that Eddie Redmayne and Mary were bonding earlier is because they both didn't like court and wanted to be in the country. So theoretically, this is great for Mary.
Right, yeah. Anne tells Mary that, they're going to be sent off to the country. And and I think she basically then even is like, yeah, I thought that's what you wanted, was to go and live on your own in the country away from court.
See, I'm making all your dreams come true.
Right. Mary warns Anne that she will not fare any better and notes that she slept with Henry out of love, to which Anne responds that a man's love is worthless. Once again, she is not wrong. And then also says that if she bears Henry a son, he will not be a bastard.
Great.
Yeah, so Mary is sent back home. Benedict Cumberbatch is nowhere to be fucking seen. Once again, I guess we're supposed to presume he's dead. I don't know.
And I read the Wikipedia article on this, and it says at this point that he has died. Where? There is no indication in this movie that he is dead. You can assume that by the fact that she later remarries, but there's no discussion. There's no, oh, by the way, my husband is dead kind of thing. And you'd think that that might be something that they would want to highlight in terms of, oh, look, her husband's dead. Now maybe he can marry her. He has proof that she can produce a son. Therefore, that's great. Mm-hmm. You'd think that they want to bring that up, but no, right. He just disappears.
Absolutely not. Yeah, it's ridiculous. Anne then now tells Henry that she will only give herself to him when he is loyal to her alone, or in other words, when Catherine ceases to be queen. Henry tries to says that he'll have Thomas Wolsey pour one out for one of the many Thomases who should be in this movie and isn't. And he says he'll have Wolsey draw up plans to send Catherine to a convent, and Anne suggests that they go further in order to make sure that their child won't be a bastard. It's implied that now we're moving toward annulling the marriage. This is never actually really explained.
Nope. You're just supposed to, I guess, know it.
Yeah. And then there's this bizarre scene where, so Henry has, I guess, heard that Henry Percy's wife is trying to get an annulment of her marriage by claiming that Henry Percy had really married Anne. So Henry, to basically make sure that this isn't true, decides at this point that the only person he believes is Mary, the woman that he like slept with for a few months and has like refused to speak to for the last now like year or whatever the timeline is supposed to be, because it's a disaster.
You have no idea. Yeah, no, the only scene where I kind of feel sorry for Henry in terms of, does he not have any other friends? I mean, at all?
Yeah, it's so weird. He asks Mary as a peace offering to her sister, lies and says that the Henry Percy stuff isn't true. And Anne then tells Mary that now she has to come to court so that they can like keep their awkward frenemy relationship going.
Yes, I have many friends, and I would absolutely lie to a king for all of them. I don't know if I'd want to be stuck there having to see the guy that I was theoretically in love with sleep with my sister, or not sleep with my sister, I guess is more accurate here.
Catherine goes on trial. Another thing that we have not explained, pour one out here for another Thomas Cromwell, who should be the person engineering this whole annulment and how it all goes down eventually. Not in this movie, really.
Nope. Thomas not appearing in this film.
Yep. And we kind of run into Catherine briefly en route to her trial, at which it increasingly becomes apparent, at least if you know what's going on, I'm not sure it would be apparent if you didn't already know the story, that Henry is going to have to break with Rome. And they have this family dinner where the Boleyns in Norfolk are basically like, what the fuck did we do?
Which is, it's great. And Anne is very calm about it. Like, it's okay, guys. I got this.
Yeah. Oh, this is what's supposed to happen. Henry's going to be the head of the Church of England. And they're like, I'm sorry, he's going to be what? It's like, oh, yeah, it's fine. It's great.
And you can't help but feel like they deserve it. I mean, they're the ones that pushed for this. I mean, It's your fault.
Oh, yeah, no, zero sympathy, to be honest, for them. Then we skip that apparently we've now accomplished all of that. I guess the marriage has now been annulled and Henry has established the Church of England. Pour one out for his Archbishop of Canterbury, Thomas Cranmer, Sir Thomas also not appearing in this film.
So we're on 3 of the 4 Thomases now, right?
Yep. And Henry, in fury at having had to do all this for Anne, rapes her, which is such a choice. Like, it is such an uncomfortable and unnecessary and gratuitous scene, and I'm real mad about it.
I'm very angry for many reasons. One, I'm just tired of seeing rape. As someone who maybe not likes but can appreciate like sort of a rape revenge genre,
right?
It doesn't usually bother me in terms of seeing it if it's done well. This is not done well, and it's just so
not at all
egregious and unnecessary, and I hated it. I really think that if they had thought about it for 30 seconds and maybe if they wanted to sort of bring up the subject, Henry marrying all these poor women and forcing women to be his mistresses, that's also non-consensual in many ways, and I think a great discussion or a great scene, something could have been made of that. To have him rape Anne like this is just so brutal and so horrible, and you kind of, we've seen Anne really become a force at this point, and you can't help but feel like this is some weird way of the movie trying to put her back in her place. Or maybe that was just me, because...
No, I definitely kind of felt that as well, that it very much felt like you have worked so hard to portray this woman as, like, very in control, and also, actually, I will say, in addition to being in control, wielding her sexuality as a weapon, and then in this scene it's turned against her.
And it's just brutal.
Yeah. It also is a scene that historically I don't think actually makes any sense, which unsurprisingly means it is gratuitous, but that essentially is something that they need because then at this point they essentially sprint through the 3 years of Anne's reign, and the only way they can do that is by basically making it seem that basically by the second they got married, Henry just hated her already. But it's like, it doesn't make sense. It's like you literally just like tore apart England essentially for her, and you hate her already?
You're literally changing the history of the world, and you're done? Really? Really?
Right. And it also is, it is well after this point that he's still pushing people to swear an oath of loyalty to her, and even goes so far as to execute a close friend of his who refuses to do so. Pour one out for Thomas number 4, Thomas More.
Oh man, how do you? Normally, if they cut a guy from a film, I'm okay with that. Less men in film, great for me.
Yeah.
But these guys are actually really important. You kind of need them.
Right, the story makes less sense without them, and it's just this bizarre decision that's made. It also, I will go ahead and say now, I have not seen the miniseries, but I've read the first 2 books, and I'm looking forward to the third, which was just released, of Hilary Mantel's works on Thomas Cromwell, the first of those being Wolf Hall. And I think that book has actually, or that's in that trilogy, has actually really quite successfully in some ways ruined this movie, because anyone who has read that book, even if they don't have other exposure to Tudor history, is going to be watching this entire movie going, where's Thomas Cromwell?
It's so dumb. That's all I got at this point. I can't even be coherent about it. I'm just angry.
Yeah. As I said, the movie then, I think at this point it's like, what? There's like 20 minutes left. And it's like, wait, there's like 3 years to go. But okay. Like Anne's entire reign as queen is like shoved into like 15 minutes, basically.
Yeah. It's very impactful 15 minutes.
Because it's like 20 minutes are left in the movie. We also still, however, have this time to have this stupid scene where Stafford shows up and is like, Mary, we both hate being at court. Let's get married. And she's like, what? And she also still calls him Stafford. They're not even on a first name basis.
That's all I got. Yep, I've reached the part where I'm just screaming in agony. Why? Why? And especially if you know a little bit of the history, and this is recently thought to be an actual love match. In real life, he was far below her, and she married him, and she faced consequences for it. Why would you not want to show that? Wouldn't that be a great thing in this romantic movie to show an actual romance? Nope.
Yeah, that would have been so much more interesting, and also I think would have functioned to make Mary somewhat more interesting, to actually show her falling in love with somebody and like getting over Henry and figuring and like trying to figure things out for herself. That would have made her a character who was less excruciatingly dull as dishwater. But that's not what they did.
Yeah.
Anne gives birth to a child who is a girl that she names Elizabeth, after Henry's mother, and conveniently also after her own. One of the benefits, I guess, of there being like 4 names.
Yeah, there's maybe 5. Maybe 5.
Yep.
We've got Henry, Mary, Elizabeth, Thomas, clearly.
Lots of Thomases. Catherine.
Yeah, we got 5. We got 5 names.
Yep. 6, we have Jane.
Oh, we also have Jane. I forgot about, well, yeah, for many reasons, I forgot about Jane.
Everyone always forgets about Jane. Henry, angrily, says, well, if we can have a healthy daughter, we can have a healthy son, and just takes the fuck off. Once again, not winning any mugs for Dad of the Year.
Now, if you're paying attention, his thimble is now, like, basically, it's about the size of a penny, and it's just flat. There's nothing to actually contain any liquid. It's just a tiny little speck.
Not even getting into, of course, the fact that at this historical moment of time, he also has another legitimate daughter, Mary, his daughter by Catherine of Aragon, who he is, like, mostly ignoring, sometimes, like, depriving of basic necessities, and also refusing to let her see her mother as a punishment to her mother. So, cool.
Okay, it's gone. The mug is shattered into a million pieces. He's just terrible. He's just terrible.
Yeah. And I will say, like, he is, at this moment in time, is less of a terrible father to Elizabeth in historical reality than he is in this movie. But, and the stuff about Mary is, shockingly enough, not in this movie. Henry is increasingly showing interest in Jane Seymour. We've all forgot about her, but Henry for some reason didn't, because once again, it's very much the like, no, I've had too much of interesting women with personalities, so let me find a boring one.
She's so boring. She's so boring. That is really her biggest crime, well, among many, is that you follow someone like Anne Boleyn, you gotta have some pizzazz. And she just has nothing.
She has no pizzazz, and she basically, her whole arc is that she basically, like, steals Anne's game of the whole, like, I'm not gonna have sex with you until we're married because I am so, like, ethical and Christian. It's like, you know what? If you're gonna pull this shit and, like, seriously, like, harm another woman over it, at least come up with your own fucking game.
Yeah. That's why I didn't like her as a kid, because she does what Anne does, and she doesn't do it as good. And it's just so frustrating.
Yeah, and she just, she's somehow just, like, both, like, conniving and boring, and it's like, how? Anne then is kind of starting to panic, essentially, and talks about the fact that she's had to engage in what she describes as depravities to basically make Henry be able to get it up, and is freaking out that all of this is going to be lost. She is pregnant again, and at this point, Norfolk, may he rot in hell, and her sister-in-law, Jane Parker / Rochford, by virtue of her marriage, may she also rot in hell, believing that without a boy, the Boleyns could essentially, that this could be their downfall, since things are not going great with Henry and Anne, suggests that basically they should team together to make sure that they can save their own skins in the event that something goes south. Charming
Man.
Yep, just great. Anne miscarries and calls in her brother and sister to dispose of the fetus. And Anne, in a plot point that I am not fond of, suggests that actually, maybe so I can, like, be pregnant again and not have to tell Henry about this, maybe you, George, my brother, should have sex with me.
I've given up. I can't talk about it.
Yep.
No. Okay, so if you know anything about the history, you know that this was actually a charge that was leveled at Anne Boleyn.
And that they were both executed because of it.
Yes, exactly. Now, even her worst detractors, the people that absolutely loathed her, pretty much agree that this was completely made up. This was Henry and his little goons trying to find something, throwing everything at the wall, hoping something stuck. And she really probably didn't ever proposition her brother. So why?
Right.
Of all the things that they could make to include, why did it actually have to implicate that it was actually true?
Yeah, and in general, I'd say also that accusation and just, like, the sheer number of men that she was ultimately accused of having had adulterous sex with is, I think, designed to essentially present her as this kind of monster of lust, because the concern was that if she was not seen as having these just incredibly unnatural and excessive appetites, then there would be an implication, well, why can't the king satisfy her? So there was just this, like, extreme that was gone to in order to essentially make sure that she was the villain, but that there were no negative implications for basically Henry's ability to satisfy a woman. As you said, nobody thinks that the incest accusation in particular had any basis whatsoever, and I really am truly disgusted by the choice, and this is in the book as well, by the choice to give credence to that accusation.
Yeah, it's incredibly frustrating, and this is the point where I was screaming at the television.
Yeah. Mary runs off to the country because she is disgusted. They don't ultimately go through with it, but Jane, however, sees them starting to and essentially climbing in bed together and runs off to tell the king because she's a little snake.
She's definitely a snake.
Anne goes to tell Henry about the miscarriage, and he calls her an evil witch and has her, as well as George, arrested. Elizabeth slaps her dumb fucking husband in the face, which is very satisfying. And Mary, I guess, gives a shit about nobody and is like run off to the fucking country with Eddie Redmayne, even though we have definitely forgot to kill Benedict Cumberbatch. Anne's trial is a good moment. She challenges the nobles' failure to rise for their queen, and also I love that she keeps reminding everyone present that Norfolk is indeed her uncle. If only she had been successful in the, like, I'm gonna bring this fuck down with me.
Oh, yeah.
Sadly, she was not, but, like, I appreciate her trying.
It's really good. She says uncle in a very specific way that really means, I hate you.
Yeah.
It's great.
It's fantastic. The existence of Cromwell, Thomas Cromwell, is briefly acknowledged when he is asked to read the charges. But that's all we see of him. The fact that he, like, engineered both the annulment and Anne's downfall, essentially, is completely not in this movie. Thank you.
Nope.
Thank you very much.
Just one little tiny cameo of a guy that we're told is him.
Yep. And everybody, including her shit uncle and her ex Henry Percy, declare her to be guilty.
Great.
Yep. George is beheaded. Mary shows up to plead for Anne. The king implies that he might basically be nice to her and, give her and show her mercy, but I'm not betting on it.
Nope.
Nor is Anne. Mary goes to her and Mary's very hopeful, and Anne is very much like, oh, Mary, you're just so naive.
Oh, sweetie, I appreciate that, but no.
She walks to her death, speaks her last word. Guards then show up and hand Mary a note, which Mary hopes is going to be like a pardon. It is very much not a pardon. It's basically like, it's very brave of you to have come and pled for your sister. Don't do it again. And Anne then starts sobbing as she realizes, nope on that whole pardon thing, and she is beheaded with a sword and dies. We then meanwhile hear a child weeping in the distance. This child is supposed to be the future Queen Elizabeth. This child should be approximately 3 years old, and there is no way the actual child that we see here is over 1, but that's a choice. And Mary then just grabs her and runs off, because in this movie it's apparently not a problem for somebody to just grab the person who at this point still technically remains the heir to the throne and leave.
I think you could probably still get away with it today. Just walk into Buckingham Palace and grab Prince George, right?
Yep, just grab him and run.
Yep, not a problem. I also like how this child that is supposedly, according to the timeline, 3, but actually looks like maybe 18 months, is with Anne and Mary's mom. Yes, there's no royal nannies, there's no tutors, there's no tutors, there's no guards. It's just the mom, just grandma, just watching the kid, as you do.
Also, grandma didn't show up at her daughter's execution?
Which, okay, I guess you probably wouldn't want to see that, but I think you'd at least be upset and not just playing with your grandchild.
Right. It's bizarre. The closing text informs us that Thomas Boleyn died wretched and disgraced 2 years later, that Norfolk was eventually imprisoned and the next 3 generations of his family executed. It skipped a few details here that I think are very important that I will discuss later. And then we finally see basically a bunch of redheaded children running around in the country because I guess this movie is claiming that Mary raised her niece. And the closing text informs us that Henry would indeed have a strong heir, but that is not a son, but his daughter, Elizabeth.
In case you knew absolutely nothing about history, surprise, his daughter's...
Surprise, it's Queen Elizabeth. We fooled you. You didn't guess.
Never would have figured it out.
So this movie.
Is it a movie, or is it just put on this earth to torture me?
It might be that. The next 2 segments will be the ones in which we talk about what this movie got right and mostly what this movie got wrong. So the first of these, Vera et Falso. I'll start with a few things that got right.
There was people named Henry VIII, Elizabeth, Anne. Yeah.
There are a couple of obviously correct beats here and there. Everybody obviously knows that Anne was executed. Henry really did have an affair with her sister Mary prior to his relationship with Anne. And as he said before, there are some other kind of vague outlines of, Anne being his second wife of the annulment that are at least more or less in this movie that are, bare bones correct.
The things you would have to get right if you had skimmed the Wikipedia article.
Exactly. The things that I will say that are somebody put slightly more effort into, the headdresses in this film, that you see the distinct headdresses being worn by members of the court, and in particular the fact that the style that Anne wears is distinct from the style that Catherine of Aragon wears, and that this actually was essentially a way of marking allegiances for a bit at the court during this period where there are essentially in kind of de facto 2 queens. That's a good detail to have in. They got the headdresses right, basically.
Yeah, the costume designer actually paid attention.
Yeah, the costumes in general, I would say, are not bad.
They're very nice looking, except for the green dress. It's a great color, but I don't know if it's just the fabric on screen or what they use makes it look vaguely like some sort of taffeta prom dress.
Yeah, the fabric is weird, but I will say the silhouettes of clothing in general, somebody clearly looked at Tudor portraiture.
Oh yeah, no, I don't blame her for... She paid attention. I'm assuming it's a woman. Most costume designers are. Somebody paid attention. It looks vaguely accurate. It just... I couldn't get over. It took me a while to get on board with the green dress because, like I said, the color is gorgeous and it looks really cool, but the fabric is just not good.
That's fair. The other thing that I will say that they got right is the lying in before childbirth, that like creepy period where you have to be isolated in your last few months of pregnancy, and then actually also for like a month after pregnancy. Or after giving birth. That is a real thing that women of this class would have expected to do. It's very much determined by social status. Like peasant women could not have afforded to pull this shit.
No.
But a woman of her status, and especially, a woman who is, ostensibly giving birth to the child of the king, this is definitely something that would have been expected.
Yep. And the more I think about it, the more I'm just going to go ahead and do it and write my movie where a well-to-do woman in the 15th or 16th century, we'll age it up a bit, is forced to do her lying in with her evil husband and his compatriots trying to frighten her, and all she has is her wits, and she's trapped in this room, and it's going to be very awful. But yeah, look for that coming eventually, maybe early next year.
Yeah, exciting. In terms of things I got wrong, I'll first just say a little one, which is that I was sad to see that there really are many of the major locations in which these events actually took place, including Hever Castle, the home of the Boleyn family, as well as Hampton Court, one of the residences of Henry and Anne, that these are real places that could have been, ideally at least, exterior filming locations, and it's sad that they, I guess, were not able to make that happen.
It is really sad, especially since Hampton Court has a beautiful dining room that Henry VIII actually had banquets in, and there are carvings in the ceiling where you can actually, apparently, still one location, see an H and A for Henry and Anne. I think it would have been beautiful on screen.
Yeah.
And instead, everything's just like, it's a bedroom.
Yeah, and there are a couple of castles that I can't remember offhand, I didn't write down which they are, but there are a couple of English castles that would have been standing in this period that they used as background, at least, filming locations. I don't think for the interiors, but for the exteriors at least. And given that they did do some filming on location, it's too bad that they did not do so in places that would have been actual real places with a connection to the story.
Mm-hmm.
Then there's the kind of things they got wrong in the general kind of narrative of Anne's life and Mary's. And there are so many of them that I, at this point, am going to just go into the next section, the Historia et Veritas, where we'll talk about the real history of a historical figure. In this case, of course, it can be none other than Anne Boleyn.
Team Anne, all the way.
Team Anne, yes. I am very Team Anne. Everybody has like a favorite of the wives of Henry VIII. If you know anything about this period, you like pick out your favorite or favorites. And Anne has always been definitely one of my favorites. The other is that I have a very soft spot for Anne of Cleves that has only grown after my own divorce, where I'm like, oh yeah, you just got a ton of money and then lived alone and didn't have to deal with any men. Like, good for you.
Yeah, Anne, obviously, my fave, now and always. But I have a real thing for Catherine Parr as well. She is very, very cool. She does not appear in this film, thank God.
Right, and should not.
No, no.
A reason that she would. And I do have, like, you know what? I'm on Team Anne, but I've got a little respect, I will say, for Catherine of Aragon's, like, just sheer stubbornness.
Yes, she's one who's one of the wives who's grown on me. As when I was a kid, I could not find anything likable about her. Her stubbornness and her unwillingness to just kind of give in.
Yeah.
As I got older and realized how important that is. I've liked that a lot more.
Yeah, and I like Catherine Parr too, and Catherine Howard, I just feel very sorry for.
Oh, I feel so sorry for her.
She was 19 when she was executed, and like she was just in over her head with the whole thing. Like,
oh yeah, she
like,
was thrown to the wolves. So I do feel bad for her.
Yeah. To return to Anne's story, the timeline is like an absolute disaster, and there are a few pretty significant changes. She was born in either 1501 or 1507. We actually don't know which for sure. I've seen interesting arguments recently in favor of the later date, which would have made her quite young, which would have made her ultimately 29 when she was executed. And she was the daughter of Thomas Boleyn, who's a pretty minor nobleman, and Elizabeth Howard, sister to Thomas Howard, the third Duke of Norfolk. And as said, Mary probably was the older daughter, not the younger. The film also presents Mary and Anne as having this lengthy, idyllic childhood together at their family home. In reality, Anne was sent at the age of either 6 or 12.
I love the distance in that. She was either
I know, right?
still basically a toddler or 12.
I know. It's just like such a weird thing that like we don't know if she was born in 1501 or 1507 because it really does make such a difference. At one of those ages, she was sent to the Netherlands as an attendant to Margaret of Austria, and then the next year was relocated to France to act as a maid of honor to Queen Mary, Henry's sister, who had recently married the King of France. And then subsequently, after Mary's husband, the very elderly King of France, died, Anne stayed on and became the maid of honor to Claude, who was Mary's stepdaughter, and then also had married the new King of France, Francois I, who was her cousin. Mary, her sister, so many Marys.
Oh, so many Marys.
Was also in France with Anne. And one of the other things this movie does is it presents her, in addition to being very boring, as being extremely innocent, both in the sense of she's not one of these manipulative people, but also really in the sense of it's like presented as, she really only has sex with Henry because she's in love with him. And there's very much, even though they are both essentially the king's mistresses at various points, there's a real kind of virgin whore narrative that this movie is emphasizing here, with Mary being the kind of innocent virgin and Anne being the whore. Given that choice, which the movie makes, I think it is worth noting that Mary, far from being this innocent when she arrives at the English court, had an affair with King Francois, who referred to her reportedly as a very great whore.
I really want to know if he meant that she was like really great or if she just like quantity great, you know?
I think it might have been quantity. or like degree. And he also, I believe, referred to her as my English mare, by the way, by which I mean by that, I like to ride her. So, like, obviously disgusting.
Classy.
And not on board with the slut shaming, but I think the story honestly would have been more interesting if Mary had been like this woman who just unabashedly was like, yeah, I really enjoy sex.
Yeah, but I don't think Philippa Gregory saw her that way. So, you know, God forbid women be complicated, right?
Right, yeah. I mean, I don't think that's what Philippa Gregory wanted to see, but I think she's incorrect.
Oh, yeah. Philippa Gregory is incorrect? No.
God forbid. Mary is the first of the sisters to return to England, where she marries William Carey, aka Benedict Cumberbatch, and shortly after begins an affair with Henry. She bears 2 children, and we genuinely can't know for sure if they're her husband's or Henry's. I'm inclined to think that there is at least enough reason to think they were her husband's, basically essentially given that Henry did not make the choice to acknowledge them in any way, which he had done with a previous bastard child of his, Bessie Blount's son, who is known, in fact, as Henry Fitzroy, Henry's son of the king, and who Henry, didn't legitimize, but he did acknowledge as his son. Mm-hmm. And I think given how strongly he felt about producing offspring, and particularly sons, I think that if he had genuinely been pretty sure that Mary's children were his, I think he would have acknowledged them in some way, and he never did.
Exactly. That was my thought, too. That's what so many things bothered me about this movie, obviously. It bothered me that there's no discussion of her son. Like, basically, once Mary has her kid, the kid is never mentioned again. Right,
and it's like, it doesn't make any sense because it's also like this is a child who, especially if he were acknowledged, like he would really be positioned in a kind of interesting way, in relation to the throne, and certainly would be somebody who like could be counted on to make a very good marriage, and who like given his being potentially both a half, given like that he would potentially be both a half sibling and cousin to Elizabeth, that like this is somebody that, like, it would have kind of made sense to be, like, thinking about this as, like, somebody who would be, like, a close ally to the queen in her future, or, like, to like, somebody who was, at this point, potentially the future queen. So it's some odd decisions are being made.
It's odd. That's a word.
Yeah. And William Carey, by the way, does die in 1528. This is somewhat after Anne, however, has returned to England. She comes back in 1522. She has this cousin that she's supposed to get married to, and that doesn't end up actually happening. And she has some kind of interaction with Henry Percy. They were at least probably secretly engaged. And then basically to kind of deal with the fallout from this, Anne was sent away from court to her family estates. She does come back to court, and in 1526, Henry starts to pursue her, and she does indeed refuse to become his mistress. So one of the things that I think is really striking and not entirely surprising is that the scenes that are by far most compelling are those scenes with Anne and Henry where she's basically trying to, like, keep them on the hook with this trick, essentially, of, like, she's not going to become his mistress, but she's going to continue to kind of carry on this relationship, but without actually having sex with him. And those are, I think, by far the best scenes in the film. And I don't think it's a coincidence that the best scenes are the ones that have some basis in historical reality.
It's not a coincidence at all. And I'm bummed that we only got maybe 1.5, 2 scenes of that. I think that there really could have been a lot more time devoted to, well, they sprint through this movie. They were never going to get through all of it. So focus on a time period.
Right.
And don't try to tell the whole story. It's not going to work. But if they had focused more on how Anne is able to divert his attention completely to her, it would have been phenomenal. That would have been fun.
Yeah.
Would have loved that.
Yeah, absolutely. Increasingly due to both his interest in Anne and the fact that he does not have and very fervently feels the need for a male heir, Henry begins to pursue the possibility of annulment. Cardinal Thomas Wolsey, one of our many missing Thomases, in fact, his ultimate downfall is because he fails to secure this annulment from the Pope, which really isn't his fault, because the Pope is probably influenced by the fact that starting in 1527, he is literally the hostage of Catherine's nephew, Charles V, the King of Spain and the Holy Roman Emperor.
Yeah, annulment wasn't happening at that point, guys.
And again, just by the way, like, this is such an interesting, complex story, and so much of the politics we just completely skip.
So annoying. So annoying.
Although public support largely remains with Catherine, Anne is essentially the queen in all but name from about 1531, and they marry in secret in 1532, at which point Anne becomes pregnant. Thomas Cromwell, missing Thomas, number 2, ensures the passage of laws that give Henry supremacy over the Church of England, at which point Henry installs a new Archbishop of Canterbury, Thomas Cranmer, who agrees with him, and the two of them Henry and Anne have a second wedding ceremony, and Thomas Cranmer declares Henry's marriage to Catherine to be officially annulled and his marriage to Anne valid.
Surprise!
Surprise! He also basically, as a way to make sure that there is loyalty to Anne, but at this point, in many ways, more importantly, to their unborn child, who is his presumed heir, because Mary, his previous daughter by Catherine, is by virtue of this declared illegitimate. He essentially has demands of all his nobility that they sign this kind of loyalty oath, and Thomas More, who had previously been a close ally of his, refuses to do so, and as a result of that is ultimately executed for treason in 1535.
And look, it's another Thomas that we don't see.
Yep. Anne gives birth to Elizabeth in 1533. And I will say, while I'm not giving Henry any Dad of the Year awards, despite the fact that I'm sure he was disappointed to have a daughter, Henry really went out of his way to reassure Anne that Elizabeth has primacy over Mary, and to really at least make sure that Elizabeth is being treated in accordance with her station. I can't say anything about his, like, deep interpersonal relations with his infant daughter, but he very much at least, like, acknowledged her and formally treated her in accordance with her being the heir to the throne. And I think that is important.
It is important, and it also really shows that she probably couldn't have walked in there at the end of the movie and just taken this child.
Absolutely not, yeah. Mary weds William Stafford in 1534, and as we said earlier, this probably is a love match. The marriage is widely considered to be very much below her station, and in response to this, Henry and Anne banish her from court. Anne and Mary probably never saw each other again. there's obviously a lot that happens after this point, and Mary is very much at court for a lot of this movie, but there's no evidence to suggest that that was true in reality.
And they show this, they express in the movie that she's going back and forth by basically having poor Scarlett Johansson ride her horse basically along one stream over and over again.
Right. Henry and Anne do have something of a tempestuous relationship, but not probably immediately after their marriage, but it does kind of eventually, gradually worsen. After Catherine's death in 1536, Henry begins to essentially openly court Jane Seymour, or otherwise known as what's he called, that milk-faced Seymour girl.
Easily my least favorite of the wives. Easily.
Same. Anne miscarries then in 1536, and some sources have even suggested that it was essentially that she flew into a rage upon seeing Henry kind of flirting with Jane, and that this then ended in her miscarrying. And as she recovers, Henry accuses her of, the accusation is sortilège, which can mean either just deception or can be spells or could imply some kind of accusation of witchcraft. He, at this point, moves Jane into fancier quarters, and Thomas Cromwell, in support of Henry, and probably also for his own reasons.
He didn't want to lose his head. He was pretty smart.
Yep, basically manufactures a number of accusations against Anne. And so these are charges of course, adultery and even incest. So she is indeed accused of having had sex with her own brother, as well as a number of other men. There are 6 men in total accused of adultery with the queen, which is treason. That's including her brother, and all but 1 are executed. Also, I find it odd that they cut out all of that.
They had to cut out so much. I don't think anything's odd that they cut out anymore. Of course, they had just butchered this story, especially towards the end.
Yeah.
They had no room for anything else. I do think it is kind of strange, though, that at no point do they mention the supposed 6th finger that Anne had on her hand, and that was proof of her witchcraft, because, witches, they be having 6 fingers, I guess.
Right, and that it's also odd that, it's just such an odd choice that they have this weird incest accusation that they give a lot of credence to, but they don't have Anne seeming to even, have ever met any other man she's not related to.
That's so true.
It's just a weird way to tell this story.
In case you're wondering, this movie doesn't really pass the Bechdel test.
Oh, no. And it is actually one of those odd things that, this movie, yeah, I do not think passes the Bechdel test, yet somehow it's, one of the problems with it is that, there's also just so many men who are missing who would actually make I hate to say, why aren't there more men?
Yeah.
But there are so many men who the story would make more sense with them there. Because I think one of the things that did kind of give some people, that kind of made some people more willing to accept the possibility of the adultery accusations is that Anne did have essentially a circle of guy friends. There were men who she was interested in, that they would hang out and talk about poetry.
Mm-hmm.
And this wasn't inappropriate or out of the norm. And it's in fact there's a long history of women having these kind of queens having these kind of circles of male adherents for whom essentially they're behaving in this way with the queen is actually an expression ultimately of loyalty to her husband. But it's something that supposedly at least gave credence to these accusations. And it seems like an odd choice to have just completely not had any of these scenes, as I said, implying that she's ever met another man.
Men that I'm not related to or that aren't the king? What are those?
Anne is indeed declared guilty and executed. It actually is a special privilege that she is allowed to be executed with a fancy, very sharp sword rather than an axe, so that it's supposed to be quicker, essentially.
Yeah, one of my favorite little details about her is that she requested the sword from France in order to spare her head basically being hacked at until it fell off.
Yep.
And, because Henry's not a completely unfeeling guy, he allowed it.
Yeah. And she is, by the way, described as having said on the morning of her death, "I heard say the executioner was very good and I have a little neck," and that then she put her hands around her neck and laughed. I will say, She seems to have really gone to her death with a lot of composure, and I also don't like that it felt like the film took that away from her, that it really has her like sobbing at the end, and it's obviously like makes it this very dramatic scene, but I don't think it's true to the person who she is.
I think it would have been way better if Mary had been inconsolable and Anne had just been like, I tried.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that would have been much better. And yeah, I think that was the wrong choice. Henry Percy, who sat on the jury that declared Anne guilty, collapsed and had to be carried from the room and then died within the next year. I do appreciate at least that he clearly felt some remorse. Her garbage uncle Thomas Howard, in contrast, apparently felt no remorse. And as we mentioned earlier, decided that like, well, it didn't work out the first time. I guess I'll offer up another niece. And his second niece, Catherine Howard, is the fifth wife of Henry and the second executed in 1542. And I will say the one silver lining in that is that in the context of that episode, Jane Parker / Rochford is also executed.
Yay,
for having
finally.
allegedly been like the go-between between Catherine and somebody she was sleeping with.
Couldn't happen to a nicer woman.
Yep. So that's really, yeah, the one silver lining. Norfolk somehow manages to maintain his position. He does, however, end up in the Tower for treason in 1547. Henry conveniently dies in between executing Norfolk's son and when he's supposed to execute Norfolk himself. And then he gets pardoned. Basically, then Edward, who is Henry's son with Jane, just kind of leaves him there. He then dies, and then Norfolk gets pardoned by Mary, Catherine of Aragon's daughter, because they're now buddies because they're both very Catholic. But yes, this fuck died peacefully in his bed in 1554.
It's so frustrating.
Yeah.
Obviously history, you can't really argue with it. What happened. But that's one guy I'd like to invent a time machine for and just go back and punch him in the face a couple of times.
Oh, 100%. The other thing I want to note is that Elizabeth was most certainly not taken from court and raised by Mary Boleyn in like some estate in the country. The king actually spent a lot of time going back and forth as to which of his daughters would have primacy. I think in part basically because like the situation that he had like divorced and illegitimized his marriages to both of their mothers kind of left him in a complicated situation in terms of like he didn't quite want to declare, like he certainly didn't really want to declare them both illegitimate and have no backups after his eventual son with Jane, but there also were like issues with him saying that like he'd been wrong on either like invalidation of marriage. So it kind of goes back and forth. It eventually ends up basically going by male first, but then after that birth order. So Elizabeth becomes queen, but only after her brother and older sister.
He didn't have to worry about it for long, though, because Jane Seymour gives birth to a son pretty quickly.
Yes, but he does, I think, still, but there's still only one. None of his subsequent wives after Jane give birth to any children. And he does, I think, like, especially because, like, Edward dies quite young. Mm-hmm. He becomes king, but he's in, I can't remember, I didn't look up the dates offhand, but, like, maybe in his, like, 20s when he dies?
I think it was,
It might have been teens.
Yeah, I think he was teen. I think he was, like, 9 or 10 when he became king, and then 14 or 15 when he died. Anyway, he was really young. And he didn't really have much of an impact.
Yes, he is 16 years old when he dies, crowned at the age of 9 and then dies at the age of 16. So, and I think for most of his life, he was like somewhat sickly. And so while Henry would have much preferred to have had additional sons, as his kind of like last ditch effort, like he didn't want to completely invalidate the claims of his daughters as people who would come after him in the event that Edward did not produce an heir.
Which had to be looking really likely, even by the time, Henry was dying. He had to see the writing on the wall with that one.
Right, I mean, he got this, like, sickly 9-year-old kid becoming king. Like, that's not a situation anybody wants to be in as you're dying.
No, and I think by this time Henry Fitzroy had died, too. He died pretty young as well. Mm-hmm. Not quite as young as Edward, but he died really young, too. So I think there's the case to be made that there was something wrong with Henry.
Right.
Because his daughters did great.
Yep.
Well, they lived. I won't say that Mary did great. Let me rephrase that.
Yeah, and it is actually interesting, of course, that Mary at least clearly had some like infertility issues. Mm-hmm. She was married and never successfully produced her own heir, of course, with Elizabeth becoming queen as a result, and Elizabeth then did not actually never married and therefore obviously didn't produce an heir. But it does suggest that it's not impossible that there were some then issues with infertility that were passed on to his children as well, especially given the evidence with Mary.
Mm-hmm. It's great. I'm if anyone deserved it, it was him.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Especially for somebody like so concerned about his fertility.
People actually died for this, so
yeah,
I'm glad that he didn't win in the end in terms of that.
Yeah, it's satisfying. With that, we can move to our next section, the Fabula Nostra section, where we talk about what movie we might make instead of this one, if somebody gave us the money to do a film perhaps inspired by this and our thoughts about it.
Okay. Yeah, let's just take Philippa Gregory out of the equation completely.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Let's just say I'm still looking for a good movie on Anne Boleyn. I've seen a couple of things. I've seen things where she appears, but she's not the focus. I have not seen The Tudors because I got 5 minutes in and it drove me nuts, so I had to turn it off.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd like to see a movie where we get to actually see her be smart. And we had one scene of it here, and it just made me want so much more. I think if you want to keep Mary and keep that element, because that is an interesting element to have two sisters in the family be mistresses and how their fates intertwined and diverged. Could have been interesting, I think, if they had focused less on Henry and more actually on Mary and Anne. Instead of having them kind of at each other's throats, I'd like there to be more of a bond, but at the same time, there's this competition between them.
Yeah.
And I like that coming into it, Mary's actually ahead because she had the King of France.
Right.
I think it would have been really interesting if they'd been more complex and less virgin whore dynamic and just nothing with Philippa Gregory. Let's just get her completely out of here, okay?
My thoughts were very similar. I would actually love to see a movie that really is about the relationship between the two sisters, but that's about them and not so much like about men. Mm-hmm. And then maybe the movie would have passed the Bechdel test, which this film I'm pretty sure does not, because they have a number of conversations, but they are all about men. So that's definitely something that I would appreciate. And also I think it would be more fun if they had Mary as like Anne, like I think, like Anne is this like very like smart, savvy person, and Anne is being this like, I don't know, she's like kind of dumb and she really likes sex.
That would have been way more fun.
Yeah, like I think that would have been a much more interesting movie. Yeah, and also obviously like take out this like bullshit, like we're not doing this bullshit, like giving credence to the incest accusation.
Nope, that is gone.
That's a real shitty take.
Because it's so stupid and very incorrect and it drives me crazy.
Yeah, that definitely is, as I said, my main thing is that, like, the thing that in theory should make this interesting is that it should be a movie that's about a relationship between two sisters. It's like supposed to be the focus, and yet it somehow gets sidelined. And it's reduced to the only aspect of their relationship is essentially about their relationship to Henry, which sucks.
But I think you could say that about a lot of movies, too.
Oh, yes. Yes, it's not unique.
No. And I think that's part of the problem with this movie, is that it's just, it's nothing different. I mean, I wouldn't have liked it. I had to tell myself, okay, this is alternate universe, this didn't actually happen. Don't worry, the history is still there for you to go back to. But if they had just really made a choice to not be wishy-washy and gone completely off the rails, I would have liked it better.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
It was the, what happened to these characters at the end scroll that bothered me a lot. I'm like, yeah, we know. If you had just kept it as more soap opera and hadn't tried to if you hadn't tried to have your cake and eat it too in terms of, this is history, this is just completely not at all true. If you hadn't tried to go down the middle of that, I think it would have been a better film.
It really is also, I think it is just a really interesting example of the fact that historical reality, what really happened, is often more interesting than the like bullshit oversimplified version of it than people make up when they're making movies. Mm-hmm. Essentially, the oversimplification in this, that the decision in this that we're going to oversimplify characters, we're going to oversimplify narratives, essentially, like, so we can make this movie. I think they ultimately make a movie that makes this deeply fascinating narrative dull.
That's my biggest there's so many complaints about the movie, but my biggest is it's just boring.
Yeah.
If you had gone in a different way, I would have been able to deal with it and at least done something. Why change the history if you're just going to make it even stupider?
Yeah. That can lead into the enumeratio section where we discuss what rating on a scale of 1 to 5 we would give this movie. I have a feeling it'll be low for both of us.
Yeah, that's a good feeling because it's true. I'm gonna give it a 2. The only things about it I liked were some of the scenes with Anne and Kristen Scott Thomas, obviously phenomenal.
Yeah, the acting I will say is not bad.
The acting is overall pretty decent, with the exception of Eric Bana, of course, who I can't think of a movie where I've watched it and thought, you know what? You know who was really good in that? Eric Bana. He's not horrible necessarily, but I lied. Star Trek. The original, the first Star Trek updated version, the 2009 version, he plays an evil guy in it. He's covered in makeup. He's actually really good.
And then the next Star Trek villain is Benedict Cumberbatch.
That's true.
Eddie Redmayne, it's your turn next.
He did, what was that one? Oh, I just went blank. The Wachowski siblings. What was his weird space opera movie that he did right after he won an Oscar? If you win an Oscar, you immediately have to go in and do something just completely off the rails because you've won your award. You don't care now. What is that movie that he did? That's gonna bug me, or else I'm gonna have to Google that.
I'm gonna give this a 1.5. Really, as I think the only thing about it that is worth mentioning positively is some of the performances. I think really I will say I think all of the women in this are quite good, and that really is the highlight of it. And it really is just, I think in some ways my frustration is that those scenes where they do actually not make up bullshit are actually good, and they just highlight what a disappointment the rest of the movie is. That those scenes with Anne and her early courtship with Henry, they're just oh, this cast actually maybe could have made a good movie, and then they made this instead.
Scarlett Johansson, this entire movie, looks either sad or surprised. Those are the two emotions that this film gives her to do, and she does them well. Don't get me wrong, but she constantly looks gobsmacked by everything that's happening.
She does. And hers is, I will say, I think Natalie Portman and Kristen Scott Thomas both give genuinely good performances. I don't think Scarlett Johansson gives what I would call a good performance, but I don't think it's her fault.
No, and I think Natalie Portman, when properly motivated, like she is here, I think she cared, and she tried.
I think she really did, yeah, and I think in a lot of ways, I think she does a good Anne. I think her performance is successful. It's just not a good movie.
No, Donald Gleason is who I would not want to see Henry VIII portray Henry VIII. He played Hux in the Star Wars movies. He played a whiny little bitch very well. I think he would be great as Henry.
I could see that. Yeah. Be on board. My other suggestion for Henry VIII that I was thinking was Chris Evans pulling a British accent, since he's not quite a redhead, but he's at least pale and he could die. And he also I saw Knives Out, and I think he did a really good job playing an asshole. But an asshole who's a little charismatic, which I think is right for Henry during this period. So I think that would work, although I'm not quite sure about how him pulling a British accent would work. But then again, this whole movie is American, so.
It is so American. I mean, I could definitely tell it with ScarJo and Natalie Portman. There were times where they were fighting it.
Yeah. I've heard worse accents, but
Oh yeah, I've heard way worse.
Cough, what's her name? Sansa Stark as the Phoenix.
Oh yes.
Wow, can she not do an American accent?
I always feel a little happy when I see that, because you see the Americans butcher non-American accents all the time, especially English ones, and I think it's
nice to see the reverse.
Yeah.
And actually, I will say Benedict Cumberbatch in Doctor Strange, I find so awkward because it doesn't sound okay. It actually doesn't even sound like he's trying to do an American accent based on listening to an American. It sounds like he's trying to imitate Hugh Laurie as a British person doing an American accent. And it just feels very awkward.
So awkward. It's a great way.
Hugh Laurie does a good job, but like it's just that like it's just like weird still. It's like just like one extra step that like I think that's what Benedict Cumberbatch is doing, and it makes it so uncomfortable to hear.
Speaking of redheads, Damian Lewis, who played Henry VIII in Wolf Hall. So I think he could be good. I haven't seen this miniseries, but I think he would be able to pull it off. I sometimes forget that he's English because he does such a good American accent. Props to him. Every other English actor should go to the Damian Lewis School of how to do an American accent.
Right. Thank you so much for coming on, and yes, for our listeners, we've had some audio issues, but so this is our third recording, but finally, so thank you for your patience and for coming back.
No, thank you for letting me come back. When you put out the call if people wanted to be on the show, and I just said, hey, go to Early Modern, let me talk about how much I hate Philippa Gregory, and you have been so kind and let me do that. I am so thrilled. Thank you so much.
Thank you. So are there places where listeners could find you on the internet if they so desired?
If they so desired, I am on Twitter with the highly original username Dana, Dana, _ Elaine, Elaine, which is in fact my middle and first name. So yeah, it's very, very convenient.
Mine is also convenient. You can find me personally on Twitter and Instagram at Sarah ifft. And if you have enjoyed this podcast, you can find the podcast on Twitter at Media-eval Pod. You can also join the Facebook group. And most importantly, please do subscribe in your preferred podcatcher app and rate and review Media-eval on Apple Podcasts. And I will read new 5-star reviews in future episodes. This is something that really helps the podcast and helps us find more listeners. So very much appreciated. And if you have any questions or suggestions, I will be introducing potentially in the future an Ask a Medievalist segment. So I would love to hear from you via email if you would like to ask a medievalist at media.evalpod@gmail.com. Thank you again, Dana, for joining me.
Thank you.
And thanks for listening to Media-eval. Bye.
Why are you here for her?
Because she's my sister, and therefore one half of me.
The Other Boleyn Girl.